On a sunny Saturday in February 1998, Johnny Isinger went out for his regular walk around beautiful Kaiteriteri and never returned.
It was quite a cold morning, if I remember rightly, but it was a lovely day, and we just thought we'd find him because, you know, he was this little lovely old man who really couldn't get far.
Hundreds of volunteers began searching that night. Police, locals and holidaymakers scoured the area throughout the following day. The only trace of Johnny was his plaid cap at the side of a walking track high up in the forest.
I think we all felt the same as what I did when I rushed down there on the Sunday, that I would probably just walk around the corner up there in the pine bush and he'd be standing beside a tree somewhere. But that didn't happen.
The last sighting of Johnny was on a main road, suggesting something more sinister might have happened.
He had wads of notes. He carried around wads of notes. If he took money out of his pocket and somebody saw it, well...
He may have been picked up by a vehicle, by somebody in a vehicle, and taken out of the search area.
If he wasn't abducted for money, did he stumble across something he shouldn't have?
The searchers who was in the original search remembers large areas of commercial-sized marijuana plantations in that region.
Johnny Isinger's disappearance is as much a mystery as the man himself. "12 years ago, 89-year-old John Isinger vanished while on one of his routine walks around the seaside area of Kaiteriteri. He was something of a man of mystery around the area. He revealed little about his background or how he'd come to be in New Zealand, but he was still a popular figure in the close-knit community. Known as eccentric but extremely hard-working, John had made his home here.
Johnny lived out at Tapu Bay, about a K short of Kaiteriteri, at a rest home there, and he was known to wander around and, you know, go for small walks. One day the rest home rang the police station at Motuoka and said, look, we can't find Johnny.
It was a hot February afternoon. John usually walked along familiar routes from the rest home in Tapu Bay to other local beaches.
I started to feel that he was late at 3 o'clock because he didn't come back for a cup of tea. But by 4 o'clock I started to feel anxious that he hadn't come back. Because it was untypical of him. But I still thought that we would just go out there and find him.
At 6 o'clock, when Johnny had still not returned, although no one believed the worst, Carol called the police.
The police sergeant, the constable went out there, and quite honestly, they probably thought that they were going to actually find Johnny reasonably quickly. You know, Kaiteriteri in February's full of people. There's not too many places you'd expect an 89-year-old man to wander off at. But Johnny wasn't there, and nobody had seen him. As Jim Bowes, the sergeant, said, Johnny Isinger had seemed to have disappeared off the face of the earth.
John had vanished in broad daylight, less than 2 kilometres from the popular Kaiteriteri holiday camp, and the area was soon flooded with volunteer searchers.
Even then, I still thought we had plenty of hours of daylight in which to find him. I didn't think he would be too far away.
They searched, people in the camp there and the locals all rallied around and come to the aid of the 2 policemen. Everybody was looking for Johnny that afternoon, and the next day there was still this help from all the community out there. Let's find Johnny.
The last known sighting of the beloved 89-year-old that afternoon was at a school bus shelter on the road between Kaiteriteri and Tapu Bay.
Tony and I had been into town picking some gear up from Motuoka in his ute, and we were coming back out into here to drop it off. As we came round the top of the bus shelter, here's John standing there having a leak. There would have been some degree of cheek out the window, probably a sheep call, the likes of the, you know, meh, that type of thing, or what are you doing, or so, light-hearted, that type of thing. And then, bang, we were gone.
What made the sighting unusual is that John had strayed from his intended route. The bus shelter is in the opposite direction to the beaches where he was supposed to be heading. With this new information, police escalated the search. Although no one considered foul play, every hour was critical for survival, and volunteer searchers were mobilised.
Obviously, we sort of looked to them to what do you want us to do, where do you want us to go. At that stage, we thought, well, if we just, last place we saw him was at the bus shelter. There used to be a path that went down from the back of the bus shelter down into that swamp, and the thought was that he might have been down in there.
The search continued well into Saturday night, but there was no sign of Johnny Isinger in the swamp or anywhere else. Next morning, the search widened to include the dense forest and rugged hills further inland.
Astrid and Sally took their horses and really went riding into the bush at the back.
We started from the bus shelter where he went missing, rode down the road a little bit and then went up onto the main track up into the forestry and just started a grid search with everybody. Astrid and I took the big wide forestry track and went off, started looking. We really thought that we'd find him lying somewhere with a broken leg or broken arm or disorientated, and just had really good spirits about finding him. Yeah. We came to a really, really steep part of the forestry. It was like, there's just no way he could be up here. I was just looking around for footsteps or anything, and here was his little hat lying on the side of the forestry track, just sitting there, just waiting, like it had just been dropped, just waiting to be picked up. Cloth checkered hat, very cute.
We actually recognised it as John's and basically confirmed it was because there was a woolen patch in it and the same wool was in his dresser.
Finally, the searchers had a tangible clue. With renewed hope, all day Sunday they searched the bush around the forestry trail where John's hat had been found, certain that they'd find him.
I remember coming home and my boys asking, why haven't you found him? Well, why haven't you found old John? Well, yeah, he's not there to be found.
Searchers were increasingly worried about the time that was passing, especially if John was lying injured or unconscious somewhere in the bush. On Sunday night, the situation was becoming desperate. Johnny Isinger had been missing for 30 hours. Local police called Sherp Tucker, in charge of search and rescue for the Tasman region.
I've turned up in Kaiterteri on the Monday morning with quite a few personnel from the search and rescue groups, from Taka, Nelson, Tapawera, St Arnaud. The search process we put in was for the time. It was so-called state-of-the-art, and we thought it was very, very thorough. It consisted of teams of 6 people, side by side, covering every place we could imagine Johnny had been. And we continued to search for another 3 days. We came up with absolutely nothing.
Johnny had been missing for 4.5 days. Searchers determined that Johnny couldn't have survived that long alone in the bush. So if he was alive, he was no longer in Motueka. Regretfully, Sherp Tucker called off the search.
When is enough's enough? It's a very, very hard decision to make. It probably is the toughest of decisions that people in charge of search and rescue have to make.
Carol had wanted the search to continue.
I went to the search and rescue base on the Monday morning to ask them how long they expected he would survive. And their answer was not very encouraging. I think it might have been 2 days. And that was extremely difficult for me because I thought that John was much tougher and much stronger than they were expecting him to be.
Frustrated at not finding anything apart from the hat, some started to give voice to fears that something more sinister had occurred.
And he didn't have that ability to disappear on his own. Did he hop into a car? Did he get put into a boot? Did he get thrown over someone's shoulders and taken into the bush?
John Isinger was already in his 50s when he arrived in New Zealand by boat in the early 1970s. After travelling around the country for a few years, he found work in the Nelson area on the farm of Rex and Lois Limmer.
He'd promised to go and work for someone else for a while, and then he came back to me later at the pruning time. Always diligent, always on time, always keen on his work, whatever he did.
Isinger worked on the Limmer's orchard for the next 25 years and became a well-known and well-liked character in the seaside community.
We didn't use, the batch, so I told him he could live there as long as he wanted to. And I didn't charge any rent. He only had to pay the power, that's all. Although he always grizzled about the price of the power.
John was just treated like one of the family really around our place. I was quite young, I think I was about 10 years old, and he was a real character, a bit of a doer. It was just like sort of having a, grandfather around really.
Having no passport, it's likely that John had entered New Zealand illegally. All that's known of his past is that he'd worked on orchards in Canada.
I was told that he was Jewish and that he came to Canada when he was a young child, maybe 3 or 4, I think, from somewhere in Europe, like Hungary or somewhere.
Johnny's like an international man of mystery. He arrived here without anybody knowing anything about him, and he's kind of disappeared in the same way.
As the years passed, Johnny became less independent. He was no longer able to work on the Limmer's farm, although he continued living in their batch. His sight was deteriorating and a worrying trend started.
He went through a phase where he was wandering off, and our dog used to sort of go and find him and bring him back and so forth. One particular day he went for a wander up to the corner of the farm and then kept on walking and was disorientated. Walked between 5 and 8 kilometres right over into Tasman.
Don't know how he managed it overnight. I think there was a shower in the night as well. I said, where did you sleep, John? He said, didn't sleep much, but he was, he'd been out all night.
This time, nothing untoward happened. John was found and returned home, but the Limmers realised that he was no longer able to look after himself.
It was probably because he was unwell, but also because of the fact that his eyesight was getting worse as he got older, and that's what needed to be repaired.
Though he'd tried to keep it secret, the Limmers discovered John was going blind.
That was when we realised that we would have to do something better for him in the long term. The decision to move him down to the old people's home was hard, but it was probably a decision that needed to be made.
The Limmer family were pleased to find a small rest home close by at Tapu Bay in Kaiteriteri.
The first memory I recall of him was discussing why he needed to be there, and he was angry because he was there and not back on the orchard.
I know you're frustrated, but all your friends...
He soon settled in and got on well with the other patients.
Still fiercely independent and determined to be outdoors, Johnny ignored concerns about his safety and found freedom in his daily walks.
He liked to walk down to Dummy Bay, which was in our area of Kaiteri, so he could get there without going onto the main road.
However, worryingly, Johnny was still often disoriented and wandered further and further afield, sometimes straying onto the main road.
I struck him about 2 or 3 k's this side of Stevens Bay, and he was on a windy road, and it was the end of January, and the road was extremely busy. I could see that the guy was actually in trouble, but I can't believe how he'd gone that far if he had travelled down the middle of the road and no one had stopped to help him. I said, "What are you doing? Come off the road." And I got him off the road, and he was looking in the sky all the time, talking about power lines and saying what a good job they'd done of putting the power lines across. I thought I knew where he'd come from, so I U-turned and took him back to the Tapu Bay rest home and asked them whether Johnny was still there. And they said he was, and I said, "Well, I don't think he is, I've got him." And they were quite surprised he'd actually travelled that distance.
When John disappeared 3 weeks later, it was assumed he'd wandered off again. Police suspected that, suffering from dementia and poor eyesight, he'd lost his way and maybe had an accident. But to those who knew John well, foul play was also a possibility.
He had wads of notes. He carried around wads of notes. He didn't trust banks particularly, and he would always have money with him. I might have thought he might have had $1,000 with him.
Was Johnny the victim of a robbery gone horribly wrong? His hidden stashes were an open secret in the community. And on the day he vanished, it's believed he was carrying a substantial amount of money.
I thought he might have had $1,000 with him, but he hadn't taken it out and left it behind that day. So we assume that the money was in his pocket.
Furthermore, and the most concerning, Isinger would often accept lifts from anyone who offered.
And he would get in the car.
He would get in the car, absolutely. And this is a possibility, I believe, that he was involved with somebody that took him out of the area. Pretty much, yeah, that's my theory about it.
At that stage, I began to think that there was something more to it. For a little old man who was more often than not disorientated to go up into that area, he needed a bit of help to get up there, I feel. And the fact that he possibly had quite an amount of money on him, he could have been offered a ride, he could have been, I don't know. To me, I can't believe he got up there on his own.
What was most unusual was the last clue to Johnny's whereabouts. A hat found some 60 metres up a steep climb in the native forest. The first day he went missing, the area had been well searched and the hat not found. People began to wonder how the hat got there and when.
It was in the main track. Hundreds of people from the Kaiteri motor camp went up into the hills. People went with their four-wheel drive quad bikes. Definitely they would have gone past the area where the hat was. So it could not possibly have been missed the night before. Either John walked over that track in the dark after everybody had stopped, or else it was planted there.
If there was a sinister motive behind this, it's probably quite a logical thing for someone to do. Plant part of his clothing, knowing that that would divert everybody's attention where he may have gone.
One of the searchers who was in the original search remembers large areas of commercial-sized marijuana plantations in that region, and it's possible that he bungled into one of those, into the barbed wire fence around it, and got him into trouble. Whoever owns this plantation don't want Johnny found on their patch, so they've shed the hat somewhere else to lead searchers off the trail.
If the hat was planted as a red herring, no amount of searching in the area would have turned up Johnny Isinger.
We searched our best. I was involved, but the minute-by-minute decisions made by the management team before I got there and after I got there, the minute-by-minute decisions by team leaders and people out the bush were all in the truest endeavours of trying to find Johnny. It's just that our processes basically were the same as what they were in the 1960s and 70s and 80s.
For Sherp and the residents of Kaiteriteri, the disappearance of John Isinger still haunts them. However, search techniques and technology have evolved significantly since the 90s, and with Sherp's help, we intend to re-examine the case of John Isinger.
Let's hope that technology can be able to find him and we can get resolution.
Ladies and gents, basically, the call went out over the last couple of weeks about Johnny Isinger, Phase 2, and you're our incident management team that's going to be looking into this.
12 years after John Isinger went missing from Kaiteriteri on a hot February afternoon, Sherp Tucker has assembled a team of search and rescue experts to re-investigate the Isinger cold case.
We do have 2 days of planning, so we don't have the pressure of obviously trying to save John's life, because that was 12 years ago, so that's a huge advantage. The disadvantage obviously is when we get out and do the searching, the terrain is 12 years different.
There have been great advances in search and rescue technology and methods since 1998. When John Isinger was first reported missing, the immediate search effort was local, amateur and inefficient.
I think a lot of effort was put in by a lot of people in trying to find him, and probably effort too fast, too early.
We used to joke a lot about when a search occurred in a rural area that the local cop went down to the pub, rounded up a bunch of people and out they went, and the effectiveness of that searching would obviously vary depending on how long they'd been at the pub, and pretty much just saturate the area with people. And that's kind of how the early Isinger search kicked off, using people out of the campground, so untrained, just sheer numbers and sort of smothering the area and hoping for the best. Today, the process is a lot more intelligence-driven, so we have less resources in terms of people, but they're better trained and focused really on finding clues.
This guy got full-blown dementia, or is he just he got the symptoms of dementia?
It would seem he's got the symptoms of, and everyone thinks it could be. So hence why we've got the 2 medical experts to actually come in and examine that in more detail.
If you're elderly and you've got poor vision, then walking downhill is much more challenging than walking uphill, so he would naturally go up.
One of the most important new methods is the use of statistical profiling, intelligence based on thousands of cases worldwide. The research and experience comes directly from sources including the British Police and FBI.
We've got things called lost person behaviour now that, this accounts for 30 and 40,000 cases similar to Johnny around the world that have got documented stats on them.
Now, let's take you back to the bus shelter.
Yep.
So you're driving in a ute,
Yep.
and you saw John at the bus shelter.
Yeah.
I think it was just on the other side of the bus shelter.
This team will make a generic profile of Johnny, 89 years old, whatever disabilities he had. They'll make a generic profile of him. And then the interview team that goes out and re-interviews, they'll come back and everything personalised about Johnny, they'll pour on top of that profile.
Carol, you know we're here today for you to paint a picture of John for us. We're particularly interested in a picture of him a few weeks before he disappeared.
And then we'll possibly have a profile of what Johnny would do.
The original search records list John as having Alzheimer's and being a demented, frail old man.
No,
but that's not the picture. No.
Over the summer, he cleared off the section in front of the house, which was covered in bracken and gorse. And he did that every day, from daylight to dark.
So he'd work an 8-hour day?
Yes.
At 89?
Yes.
So he was tough.
He was tough, yeah.
Yeah.
Other people thought that John was an belligerent old sod because he would argue. But in fact, I really liked him and we got on well together. And mostly I could reason with him. Well, I thought I could reason with him, except on the day that he went missing, obviously I'd failed.
Carol's concern was that Johnny kept straying onto the main road when he went for his walks.
On the Thursday before he went missing, he was heading off again to the main road, taking a shortcut. And I argued with him about going that way. He would walk off and I would walk after him and we'd talk some more and argue some more, and eventually he came with me. I was really satisfied that he understood the issues, and when he went for a walk 2 days later, I thought everything would be fine, although I did reiterate that you cannot go out onto the main road.
Except John did go to the main road. He was last seen at the bus shelter, and then he simply vanished. Accepting common opinion that John was a frail and confused old man, and assuming him lost in dense bush, the searchers of 1998 believed John couldn't survive for more than a few days.
I was humbled by the amount of people that were searching for him and the effort that the search and rescue made, but I was also shocked when it was over in 3 days.
Because you thought he was physically competent enough to survive longer than that.
Yeah, but they told me he wasn't.
The point is that the people conducting the search never came to ask Carol anything about him. So how would they know? They didn't know him. Carol knew him, but they didn't come to ask her. So the whole profile of the person you're looking for is completely erroneous.
I think you're right. I think the profile from back then is erroneous, and that's why we want to cold case it now and get it more accurate, because the techniques have improved.
So will a more accurate profile unearth different scenarios to explain Johnny's disappearance? And what about the possibility of foul play? Search and rescue profilers are trying to find the remains of 89-year-old John Isinger 12 years after he was last seen near Motueka. They've been brought to the spot in the native forest where Astrid and Sally originally found Johnny's hat. It's steep, difficult country. The topsoil is treacherous and crumbles underfoot.
Astrid, somewhere about here, do you think?
Right about here.
Right about there. And you come down, and I'm slipping away. That's how steep and crumbly this ground is. You come down there on the horse.
The location of the hat remains the central clue to the Isinger mystery. How did John come to be separated from it?
So the hat might have been flicked off by an overhanging branch as he was coming down or something like
actually,
that?
Yes, it could have
been. Yep.
Could a disorientated old man, nearly blind, have made it this far into the forest? Just how bad was his eyesight? His medical records bring into sharp focus what he could and could not see.
His right eye is the eye that he had the central retinal artery occlusion, which is the stroke to the nerve of that eye. He would have only been able to see light and dark. The left eye, he had the glaucoma, and in that eye, the main disadvantage or limitation he would have is a constriction of his side vision. So ultimately, it would have looked like he was looking through a pinhole. He would have been at risk of tripping, and then if he did get back up, navigating his way. So if he did get lost, he would have only been searching through a little pinhole type size vision to find his way back.
It's possible John could have followed a forest track, but not have been able to see where he was or how to get home.
I think he just would have plodded on, because even if it got dark, he wouldn't have worried, because because of his blindness, the darkness didn't worry him.
Although everyone agrees Johnny Isinger was blind, there's now a discrepancy about what caused his confusion. Was it dementia or something else? Sally recalls the incident that prompted Johnny to be put into care, and it provides an entirely new explanation for Johnny's state of mind.
In '96, he went missing off the back of the farm, went across country through very rugged terrain, was found bulldozering his way through a farmer's fence, getting into a paddock, trying to get home, and was quite confused and unwell. So he was admitted and assessed mentally as being confused at that stage, but it was because he was physically unwell. He had an infection.
Such infections cause delirium, and this could have led people to mistakenly diagnose Johnny with Alzheimer's, when there was in fact a much simpler explanation.
Urinary tract infections are very common in elderly people and make them quite confused. So I'd be putting my money on a urinary tract infection.
And if it wasn't a urinary infection causing the confusion, the explanation could lie in Johnny's eyesight.
His vision may have contributed to this confusion, and patients who have profoundly poor vision in both eyes can get a syndrome that's called the Charles Bonnet syndrome, which results in patients filling in the lack of visual input that their eye produces. They see hallucinations. They can see flowers, wallpaper, patterns, animals, creatures, and it's just the brain's way of trying to fill in the missing gaps. For many, many years, these patients were labeled as demented or crazy and put into psychiatric hospitals.
If the hat was down here, why do you think it might have been hard for others to spot it during the day?
I didn't realise it was a hat to start with. I jumped off to have a look. Yeah.
What colour was the hat?
It was a tweed, sort of browny colour.
And that would have blended in nicely with these pine needles?
Yes.
The hat had definitely been sitting in that spot for a while. The hat it was still wet on the top from dew, and the colour of the hat basically blended in with the clay and the pine needles. It was not sticking out like a red hat, hey look, there's a hat on the track. It actually blended in with the environment.
And one of the reasons may not have been found, not if anybody did come up here. If you're coming up here, you're puffing like anything. You really, quite honestly, when you get here, you're goal-orientated for that little flat spot up there. It's part of human nature. Hey, it's flatter up there, I'm going for it. And you could walk straight past that, yeah.
Reprofiling using the latest techniques has produced a completely different Johnny Isinger for today's searchers.
Mentally and physically, this is quite an exceptional 89-year-old. I just want to be very clear, because the first teams were looking for someone with Alzheimer's. This guy did not have Alzheimer's. He's tough as old boots. He can work 8 hours on a sloping section grubbing weeds, which I can't do. When he's walking around these bays, he's talking to lots of people. He will interact with any stranger that approaches him. He's fiercely independent.
The original searchers did not seriously consider foul play. Based on what they now know, the new team will target just 2 areas: the forest where Johnny's hat was found and the swamp where he may have wandered or been dumped.
Today everyone's quite positive. They're certainly, whilst the chance of finding Mr Isinger is low, it is still a chance, and so people are pretty focused on trying to find him and are really hopeful for a positive outcome.
Okay, so John Isinger went missing in Kaiteri.
Based on the information they've been given, the searchers have been asked to rank all the possible scenarios of what might have happened to Johnny, from misadventure to murder, on a scale from 1 to 100.
Lost or disorientated was top. It came out with just on 40%, most likely. Next most likely was in the swamp, and that was down at 18 to 19%. And then right down at sort of 10, 12% was the possibility of foul play. And they were sort of the top 3. But certainly, lost or disorientated at 40%, twice as likely as any other scenario, so that's what we've based this plan around.
Despite these ratings, the intel team have to admit they can't entirely rule out murder. But the consensus is the hat was not planted, and foul play is highly unlikely.
Most crimes of, we're talking about
killing somebody for money or motives like that. They're pretty spontaneous things, the majority of them. Somebody's just made a foolish decision to, knock some poor old gentleman on the head for his money. Is he really going to muck around and plan to put the hat 10 minutes away in that position? It's a way out there. It's just beyond the realms of fantasy to think somebody deliberately took that hat that far. It's just didn't happen.
You guys are going to end up on what I think is probably the prime area.
With accident the most likely scenario, search teams have been assigned the area on either side of the forest track.
It's going to be you guys.
What is it? Is it Manuka scrub?
It's a whole mixture. It's second-gen pines. As part of this morning, we've been running through and tasking teams in specific areas and really emphasising the need for thoroughness. It's 12 years later, so although the chance of finding something is small, in the 4, 5, 6% chance, it's still a chance.
Fire in the whole group.
This is probably the last time anyone will seriously go looking for John Isinger. But until an answer is found, not knowing will continue to haunt the community of Kaiteriteri.
Often thought about it, it comes back quite a bit, and he's not put to rest, and nor are we.
The new search team heads out into the forest to find out what remains of Johnny Isinger, who went missing from Kaiteriteri 12 years ago.
We're going to be searching probably for something like the sole of a shoe. Johnny may have had a metal watch. We might be looking for a watch strap. His clothing isn't going to be there anymore.
In an ideal situation, and today we would love to find John remains all together in one spot. And whilst we certainly hope that's true, there's always the chance that predators and just the natural weathering process has started to scatter some of those bones. Some of the search area is really tough. There's been a lot of accumulation of debris. Even in the area immediately around the hat, the steep sides have had slips and caved in. In some areas there's up to 2 metres of fresh soil in the bottom. You could easily be under any of those and we'd have no chance of finding him. In other places, blackberry and gorse regrowth is just so thick at some parts we're missed and couldn't be searched at all.
At times we were 2 to 3 feet above the ground. I've got no doubt we could have possibly walked over Johnny Isinger and not known it.
On one side of the track is a drop of 30 or 40 metres to dense bush. On the other, a drop of 100 metres to swamp.
Now we know that his hat was found around to the left, so he had to have made this decision point. And we're walking down, limited vision, probably wouldn't have seen the impending drop-off down the track. Came round the corner, and then just 2 to 3 metres down is where his hat was found. And it's very likely that he sort of got into the steeper part without knowing what was coming, slipped over, lost the hat down there. And then the question now is, what happened from that point?
But 12 years on, with all the changes that have happened to the terrain, is it realistic to think they'll find anything here?
Come on, guys! Stop! Jenny's got a clue.
Phone!
What do you got, Jen?
Phone!
Phone. What we're looking for?
Today's searchers have studied how bones weather and age in the natural environment. Otherwise, they could be fooled by preconceptions that a bone should look white and smooth.
We look at the discoloration and the fact that it was lying in the bottom of a whole bunch of manuka.
The bone will be examined by experts, but on first sight it appears to be that of an animal, not John Isinger.
30-second look to confirm what we suspect. Just the way that the joints are at 90 degrees makes me think that it's not human.
Day one comes to an end. The team has conducted a long, tiring search in extreme terrain, and they look forward to a hot shower and a meal. There was no sign of John Isinger in the forest, but tomorrow is another day, and they'll try again in the swamp. 12 years ago, searchers used the same tried and true methods as they had since the 60s. A long line, arm in arm, moving painstakingly forward. Today's more surgical method avoids the risk of clues being lost in the undergrowth, trampled down as a line of searchers move forward.
So here we have a team cutting their way through the swamp. You can see that this is quite incredible growth, and that if John was lying underneath it, chances of actually detecting someone are really, really slim. You can see how hard it is to hack their way through here. So doing about 2 metre swaths, getting one track in, boxing across, cutting their way back out, and this pattern will continue on for a few more 100 metres back down the swamp yet. And you see the guys behind it checking underneath as the front person cuts the path.
The team will spend the rest of the day searching. But the swamp, like the forest, is not ready to give up any of its secrets.
I still believe he's probably there within that high priority area. I've got to say that. You know, you've seen the search process, you've seen what they've done. There were places there where trees had fallen over, or there'd been slips come down and covered things over. There were places where the surface was changed to 12 years ago. To be quite honest, we were looking for something completely different to the Johnny who got lost, and it was fairly hard to find those sort of things. Johnny Isinger went missing, in my opinion, basically misadventure on his part, somewhere near where his hat was found. Foul play just doesn't fit into the scenario. You could look at this and say there was a bit of a downside that we never found John, and that's quite honestly, there is a downside that we physically haven't found John. I tend to sort of be one of those people that the cup's always half full, and there'll be things coming from Johnny's search that'll actually get out there into the arena and help us find all kinds of people.
After some months, we decided to get together on a Sunday afternoon, I think it was. We planted a tree. We chose a dogwood tree because it's a Canadian tree. And it's beautiful in the autumn and in the spring and summer as well. But particularly for the autumn leaves that we would remember John for. I remember the staff standing around while I was talking. I remember the residents sitting there. It was very emotional.
He would always wave, always say hello. He was like a lovely little grandfather that, you know, that you would hope he would never come to any harm.
Johnny, I believe, is probably within 150 metres of where his hat was found, on a little fire break that overlooks the estuary at the back of Kaiterere.